For 15 years, I was a contractor, taking a lot of what we learned after Hurricane Andrew hit South Florida in 1992 and really began the whole wake-up call about the amount of risk the U.S. actually has. When you go from Brownsville, Texas to Maine, there is now, at the time we started, it was about $1.5 trillion worth of property at risk from landfalling hurricanes, which are a naturally occurring weather pattern. And now that number is somewhere around 2.6 trillion. The coastline was a great place to migrate to. Everybody wants to retire to Florida, South Carolina, North Carolina, Maryland, along the coastline. So now what you had is over 50 or 60 years, you had a mass migration, and now 46% of the entire U.S. population lives in hurricane-prone areas along that coastline from Maine all the way around to Brownsville, Texas. That's almost half of the entire U.S. population. If you add the Great Lakes and the California coastline, that number becomes 78%. So when people talk to me about global warming, I like to respond like Bill Reed did when I was in a conference and somebody asked him, well, what about that global warming thing? Is that something we should be worried about? And he said, no. He said, this is what you need to be worried about. Your house is going to be hit. Are you ready? And are you prepared? Or are you going to be a victim? And so IBHS started up a research center in 2010, and they have been one of the main drivers of some of the stuff we're going to show you today. I'm not really going to talk about I-Form so much as how we've used that platform and all of the connections and the database and everything else. Like, I think that where we're different with I-Form is it's actually part of our marketing program. When we go to a new client, we show them what we can do in the ability to collect data, bring it in, and disseminate it back rapidly. We live in a McDonald's society. Homeowners, builders, even insurance companies, they want to pay for it at this window, they want to drive to the next window, they want to pick it up, and they want to consume it. So what I-Form gave us is the ability to take this program, the Fortified program, and turn it from a 3 or 4 month program from the time we did the inspection to the time the deliverable was delivered, and turn it into less than 20 seconds. Both of these houses are built to the International Residential Code. They're built for 90 miles an hour, which is the wind zone for this area right here. The house on the right had $3,000 worth of additional anchors and straps and fasteners put into it in critical areas where we know from an engineering design standpoint that it makes a difference on that structure's ability to withstand winds. The other thing we did is instead of using a builder's grade manufacturing roofing material, we put high wind resistant products on the outside of the house. Those houses were subjected to actual hurricane force winds. So that's in a wind tunnel that was built actually at probably the worst time economically. The insurance industry took $40 million and built this center. It's 6 stories high inside. It's fed by 130 fans that can generate wind speeds on a 2-story house of up to 130 mile an hour sustained winds, which is about 160 mile an hour 3-second gust. So that's just under a category 4 hurricane. They can do 140 to 150 miles an hour on a 1-story house. Those houses were sitting on a 60-foot turntable so that the houses can actually be turned during the event to simulate the effects of the hurricane force winds as they come inland. It actually affects all 4 sides of the house. So what this demonstration project showed us was a house built to code will perform relatively well. The problem was, and this was not a trick. They actually bought construction crews in from a subdivision where they were building that house plan, had them build those 2 houses. Like I said, the only thing they added was some high wind resistant siding and roofing to the one house. They had the same doors, had the same windows. They used a longer ring shank nail on the sheathing on the house on the right, and they just used standard nails on the one on the left that were required by code. And then they added additional straps and clips from an engineering standpoint to make the structure stronger so it would hold together easier. So $3,000, and you can see the difference. Those homes were selling in the $160,000 to $170,000 range. One step further, they bought in the building official from the same jurisdiction those houses were being built in, and he inspected both houses, or actually all four. They built 4 houses. One was fortified, the other 3 were to code. Brought the building inspector in, he inspected those houses, cleared them and everything else. What happened with the front door is the framers, when they put it in, they had tacked it in with a couple of nails, and they never went back and put the rest of the fasteners in the door system, so the door failed. Obviously, when the door fails, hurricane force winds enter the structure and basically just blow it apart like a balloon. We actually took the house on the right and staked the door open and tried to replicate that and tear it down. And we spent about 6 hours. We blew windows out, blew doors out, but we couldn't take the house down. And we took it up to 120 mile an hour, 3-second gusts, which is really almost Category 2 hurricane. So that's what we do. And as a result of all of the science and engineering and the stuff that we're now seeing in this full systems testing, IBHS in 2010 launched a program called Fortified Home. The important thing about this is because it was the insurance industry's product, they funded the research, they funded 20 years of post-disaster engineers and students to go out into the field, look at building failures, determine why the building failed, and collected all of this information back. We know how to build a house so that it can withstand a F1, F2 tornado. It can be a wood frame house. It does not have to be concrete. We can withstand a Category 3 hurricane, but we have to eliminate the mistakes and errors made by contractors of substituting connectors and clips because they're a little less expensive or because the supply house ran out of the right one. And we have to correct the errors of building inspectors who are generally tasked with an overload of work. And since building departments have been cut way back and they're very poorly funded, what's happening is they're missing a lot of stuff. So the Fortified program uses what they call a certified evaluator. So that's an independent third party that goes out and checks those things as the house is being built or as it's being re-roofed and retrofitted to make sure that they get those major components installed correctly and that the work is done properly. So there's 3 levels. There's bronze, silver, gold. It's a stair-step program. You can't reach silver unless you meet all the requirements of gold or of bronze. You can't reach gold unless you meet all the requirements of silver and bronze. Bronze is a big one. The sealed roof deck, and I didn't show that video. It's kind of interesting, but we've only got a few minutes here. In most states now that have adopted this, and the states that have adopted this now are Mississippi, Alabama, North Carolina, and Georgia. And it is being used voluntarily by the insurance industry in almost every other coastal state. So this has become a major source of reducing your homeowner's windstorm insurance, which generally in coastal markets can be 60 to 70% of your total premium. So the incentives are there. They got the program put together. We established an evaluator collection piece. An evaluation basically is an inspection. That's where we came in. We've been working with these groups for about 25 years, and they said, Darius, you got to do the evaluator training. We're going to launch the program in your backyard. Will you do it? And we said, sure. We went and did the training, and we're sitting there thinking, man, that's a lot of data they want. One of the big problems with engineers, and I'm going to deal with IBHS as a client, is when they develop something, is anybody in here an engineer, structural engineer? No? Okay, good. I've actually worked with engineers almost all my career, and love them. They're very smart people. But when it comes to inspection, if I take this room and I go, how many people here are from Zerion and drive a white car? None. Okay, how many people here are from Zerion and drive a blue car? 1, 2. Okay. The way the engineers would have us do the inspection is, okay, let's count all of the people in that area. Count all the people in this area, count all the people in this area. Let's count all of the seats and empty chairs. Let's count the steps, and let's go to the parking lot and count all the cars, and let's see how many of them are blue. And we said, wait a minute, this is crazy. So they take a process that really what we wanted to know is how many people are driving a blue car that work at Zarian Software. So that's a yes or no question, really, or it's a simple count question. So they came up with this process and built a database at a cost of about, I hate to even say it was over $500,000. They went to a design company and went the typical route. So what we ended up with before that was we started with a manual data collection system. And believe me, I know manual data collection systems. I was telling some folks at lunch, in the 90s when we started, we had a 40-page form. We would take a camera, a roll of film, go out and shoot 30 to 40 pictures or however much of that film we could use, then take that and have it developed. The inspection or the state would then have us take those photos and tape them onto a piece of 11.5 by 8 by 11 paper inside certain little squares that they had on there that could easily hold a digital photo, and then mail it off to them. So the inspection for that process was 4 or 5 hours and an hour's worth of paperwork to do on the back end. They spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on this .NET-based system. The problem with that is, like I said, about how many people drive a blue car that work at Zarian Software. They had a massive amount of redundant information that we wanted. We asked them, we said, well, if you're just trying to determine that, why don't you just ask them? And they were like, oh no, we need to look at all the cars because we think that data would be a great data set to have. Because what if we wanted to go back later and say, well, how many blue cars were there in the parking lot? And how many people were in there? And what percentage of Zarian people were in the room? And we said, well, that's all fine and good, but does that really answer any questions in terms of how we make that particular property stronger? And they said, no, not really. So we told them they had to have a front-end app. So they hired a developer. He came and he built an Android mobile app. Then Jelly Bean comes along. Poof, that app was gone, would no longer work, and the guy wanted another $40,000 or $50,000 to go in and fix it. So they scrapped that deal. The deliverables that came out of the back of the .NET-based system were basically 2 pages that were developed by the legal department that explained what the inspection was and why they weren't liable for it. And then it went into a series of just small tables that said, well, you meet this condition or you don't meet this condition, and then it had further delineation down below that explained, well, you need to retrofit it or you don't need to retrofit it, or hey, that's not applicable to your house. But there was no photo. There was one photo on the cover page and that was it. We took like 60 photos. Where's all those photos? So consumers are also very visual driven when you talk to them about their house. They say, well, show me what you're talking about, point to it. So if you have photos in the report, you can actually do that. So 250 evaluators were trained, only 40 are currently active, and out of those, 8 of them produce 80% of the total fortified designations in the entire US. 4 of them work for me. Inspecting took 2 to 3 hours with an additional hour of upload and reporting time. That was the old system that they first came out with. Program administration took 2 to 3 weeks after we submitted that to audit that report the way they got it and then send a report back to us that we would then take back to the homeowner. And the homeowners in the meantime would be going, I paid a lot of money for this. Where is my report? So they'd be ringing our phone off the hooks and we say, just be patient, just be patient. Program administrators, we were talking to them certainly, but they were not soliciting ideas from the users and they didn't understand the economy and value the new technology being used. We had been using iForm for about a year at that point, and I was like, you gotta look at what I have, you gotta look at what I have. And they were like, yeah, Darius, we know you got all the best stuff, sure. You know, they write you off. The reason there was so much recidivism in the turnover in the evaluators is the program wasn't profitable, it wasn't marketable, and it certainly wasn't user-friendly. So we took iForm, and I took that philosophy of how many people in this room drive blue cars that work for Zarian Software, and I completed a whole new process using their standards to look at a house. We got all the redundancy out of the form. We went and took a pre-evaluation inspection that took 2 to 3 hours. We cut it down to 15 to 40 minutes. We then took a price tag of $300 or $400 or $500 and dropped that down to around 100 or less. So one of the complaints of the consumer is they would call about their house and they would say, well, can you tell me if my house is going to meet the program requirements or not? And we'd be like, well, no, not really, because we need to come look at the house. And they'd say, well, let me describe my house for you. An hour later, they'd say, well, it doesn't sound like I'm going to qualify. I'm not going to go forward with the program. So we had an 80% loss of people that called in that were interested in the program who decided not to participate in the program because they perceived that the price was more than they wanted to pay to find out if their house would qualify, and it kind of sounded like they were going to have to do some work. So we basically were losing our audience, because one of the big things of the Fortified program is the opportunity to educate consumers about their house, specific to their house, and show them where their weak spots are, and then give them a roadmap to take those weak spots, retrofit them, hire a contractor, get it fixed. Then they get a designation certificate, their insurance cost goes down, and in most cases, the cost of the retrofits is paid for in 1 or 2 years in a coastal state. It's quick. Yep, so now that we had iForm, I love that last presentation. I was sitting there the whole time, I feel your pain, I feel your pain, I feel your pain. We looked at going to the SQL deal, we looked at going to the hybrid server and everything else, but we really didn't need to take and reshape our data, because we did that when we built the form. What we needed was deliverables. We needed a nice report that when we presented that to consumer, they said, yeah, I got more than my money's worth, and this really tells me what I needed to know. This educates me, this gives me all the answers, and then when they call back to the office to go to the next step of the program, we have somebody who's informed. They're looking at the report, we're looking at the report, we can talk intelligently about their house, and the call went from an hour or an hour and a half with some people down to about 10 or 15 minutes. How do I start? You know, and we like, go get bids, and then we'll talk to your contractor. Since we were able to, every time we submitted, that report went off the iForm device, went to the database. We used a webhook and used WebMerge to build all our reports. And so we sent a 17-page report back that had the standards in it, that had the specifics about their house, that had all the photos in it. And at the end, because we had problems with the contractors telling them, well, you don't need that, we went ahead and created a contractor bid form and gave the contractor all the standards they had to meet, plus the documentation that they had to collect during the re-roof, so that we went back to do the final inspection. They did most of the work for us, and it wouldn't drive up the price anymore. So now we took something that was failing massively, and it became scalable, marketable, and profitable. And instead of doing, I don't know, I think the first year we did 1 inspection, and the next year we did like 10 on an existing home. We now do probably close to 400 or 500 a year, and that number is growing every year geometrically, because everybody talks to their neighbors, and of course the referral just spreads like wildfire. So that goes over the reporting. Yep. So now, instead of spending all that time on the phone and not making any money on it, we were doing evaluations. An evaluator could only do about 1 to 2 of those big evaluations a day. So we took that, and we can now do 10 to 15 a day. Even though the price tag's smaller, we're generating more revenue, and we're educating more consumers, which is then spreading out and bringing more business in. So it's been a real win-win. So the way we kind of utilize iForm in our business is, it's part of our marketing strategy. It allows us to push data immediately. We can create custom deliverables. We have some clients, because we also work for some very large insurance companies that we do inspections for, where they push us data in a CSV file, we upload that into iForm, and then we have they give us a hook or a endpoint for their server. On the back end, we download that into iForm, and they do a procedure call off the back of our data and pull it back into their system. So we didn't need to go out and learn SQL. Most of the companies we were dealing with already had those IT departments. We just needed them to create the hook so that they could pull that data in, and then they would take it and do all the other stuff. So believe me, I don't know how many times Tony's told me, look, we're only going to be good at one thing. If you need reporting, that's not our problem. Here's some things you should try. We still have to manually submit documents into the Focus database, which is the IBHS platform. So what we've done now is we're taking the new form, and we're taking that out and dropping it into a WebMerge document that is in the same format, same consistent language and everything else that their database is set up on. So I can take a data entry person and have them just input that, and I don't have to take that evaluator out of the field and putting behind a computer where they're really not making any money. But the next phase of that is we're creating a new form that will communicate directly with their full database. Currently, our little pre-evaluation does go straight into their database, but the bigger form that when somebody actually does a job or builds a house, there's about 250 to 400 data points. There's a lot of photos that have to be individually uploaded, dragged and dropped into their little windows. So there's quite a bit of time to do it. So the next phase of that is to automate that back in, eliminate that, and then move forward from there. So we see iForm really as a partner for our business, and that's the way we've leveraged these guys. When we go to a new client or a client comes to us with a consulting contract and says, because we are one of the premier builders of mitigation programs in the U.S. We've worked with Louisiana, we've worked with Mississippi, we've worked with South Carolina, we've worked with Florida. We're working with Alabama to launch a new program called Strengthen Alabama Homes. And we recently completed a pilot with the Rockefeller Foundation and Prudential Insurance for a program called My Strong Home. And for those people who don't think much of insurance companies, the insurance companies are actually putting the money up front for the homeowner to make all the improvements to their house to reduce their insurance cost. And then they're using the insurance savings to pay that loan back off through a premium finance company. So there's a lot of things happening in the world. One of the biggest things is we have an unsustainable model going back to where I first opened about that huge migration to our coastal markets. The reason the damage costs keep rising every year is because property is more expensive. They keep building in coastal areas. I mean, if you go to any coastal market, you will not see that much of a slowdown in construction. There were huge slowdowns in parts of Florida, inland, and somewhere else, but the coastal markets, for the most part, are still growing at a fairly good clip. So the only way we can really solve this problem is we got to stop building stuff that the next windstorm is going to knock down. Then we got to go back, because the main part of the problem is 70 to 80% of the building stock in those coastal areas was built before there were building codes or before there were well-enforced building codes, and that's the stuff that's really driving the costs up. So this program has both a retrofit component and a new construction component, and Rhode Island's fixing to adopt it. There is movement in Virginia, there's some movement in Maryland, so I think probably within 7 to 8 years, almost every coastal state in the U.S. will be building this way. FEMA's adopted the program, HUD has adopted the program, so it's really now the only national-based program. And it also has a wind and hail component that's used inland, and they just launched that in Oklahoma, where the insurance premiums are incredible because of the tornado activity. So, and it's the same type of thing. We're applying the same type of logic in how we approach a house to retrofit it or rebuild it.